of Western cultures. Today, we are so honored to co-host this poetry events series sponsored by the League of Canadian Poets, together with Shoreline Cultural Services and Lakeside Academy of Canada. We are so happy to have the current poet laureate of Toronto, A.F.Moritz, and Mississauga's inaugural poet laureate, Anna N. Here today is our guest speakers. Welcome, Al. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Young. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll leave with Anna to do more introduction of our esteemed poets, and she will be facilitating today's event. And to our audience, we're recording this event, so please mute yourself and turn your video off until at the end there will be Q&A session, and then you are more than welcome to unmute yourself, jump in to talk with our guest speakers, ask questions. But before that, if you have any questions, you can send it to the chat room. And we have a volunteer here today, Mr. Stephen Chan. He is the third-year student at the University of Toronto. He will be taking care of our chat room. So if our guest speakers missed out some questions, he will just bring it up to them. Thank you, Stephen. So without further ado, I'll give the time to Anna and Elle. Anna?
Hi, good afternoon. So glad to see you all here. Thank you very much for joining us. Some of you have joined our first session with Molly Peacock. I'm glad to welcome you back and thank Yang Wang and the East-West Learning Club continue co-hosting this event. Thank the League of Canadian Poets for funding. So now, and also thank new and old friends from core views, from WeChat, from book clubs. And now it's my honor to introduce today's guest poet, A.F.Moritz. Here I want to share his biography. So let me share his biography. Okay. A.F.Moritz is a Canadian-American poet, teacher, and scholar. He is the 6th Poet Laureate of Toronto. He has published more than 20 books of poetry and several volumes of poetry translated from French and Spanish. His most recent books are As Far As You Know, 2020, and The Sparrow, Selected Poems, 2018. In 2015, Princeton University Press republished his 1986 volume in the Princeton series of contemporary poets, The Tradition. His poetry has received the Griffin Poetry Prize, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Award in Literature of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He is a 3-time nominee for the Governor General's Award for English language poetry. He teaches at the University of Toronto. Al has another achievement, and I encourage you to go to his website to find more. And here I list several of his books, and also his books, and also I list his translation works. And later we will discuss a little bit. So for those who don't know me, I will quickly introduce myself. Although already Young introduced, so I'm Mississauga's inaugural Poet Laureate, and I have authored 5 collections of poetry. And my next book, Mirrors and Windows, a collection of translations, will be published by Guernica Editions in 2021. Today we will discuss 3 poems by A.F.Moritz, and from that book, and also translation. Okay, so now as you see, Al have so many translation works, and I now stop sharing. I will welcome Al to talk about and also first I want to ask him, Al, you are the Toronto Poet Laureate, right?
Right.
I know you are very, very busy with many duties, right? So
Yeah.
could you quickly describe this for us?
Well, you know, the Poet Laureate has basically two strains. Certain things come in, you know, happen. Organizations want you to participate, and they contact the city and they say, well, is the Poet Laureate interested in this or that? So let me give you one example. There's a great red oak tree that goes back to over 300 years old, I believe, and it's on the earliest European registers of the city and was known to the native peoples. Move to preserve this tree by buying for sale property and house, raising the money to do so. By a group of citizens, and they're celebrating it in various ways, and they've been very successful in getting it on television and so on, and they're interested in having a poem about it. Well, you know, I don't have to write it if I don't want to, but that's the kind of thing I'm interested in, so I'm planning to write something about it. Anybody who knows my work knows there's already poems about trees all over it. So yeah, it's just as good for me to add one more. And this is a really worthy cause. So that's one example, you know. And then I'm supposed to have a sort of legacy project, you know. I'm supposed to just do something of my own interest, but for the city consistently through the throughout my term. And in a way, this is part of that. Many things just come to me. Like this came to me because of Anna. I didn't create it, but yeah, that my term would be devoted to reaching out to other language communities and their poetry, and at the same time in Toronto, and then at the same time, and sort of related, reaching out to a disadvantaged group in a sense different from the usual one of today's identity politics. By disadvantaged, the disadvantaged group I choose is the really down and out people, street people and so on, not identified in anything, in any way by race or sexual orientation or anything like that, but just by being outcast and terribly poor. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlap amongst all those categories. But so those are sort of the two strands of what I'm doing my best to pursue on my own initiative and on purpose and consistently throughout the 3 years.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I know for each poet laureate, you have your own like plans, right? Or project to help the city to promote poetry. Yeah, I still miss these moments when I was Miss Saga poet laureate. Anyway, how time flies. Anyway, now let's talk about the poetry and the translation. How about you share some your stories behind the translation? Do you want me share the screen like before, like or you want to use your book to show?
You can do whatever you want, Anna. You do what you think looks best. I'm not really very aware of what would be best, you know.
Okay, so I will share the screen. So then, yeah, we all see you have a note for translation works. So you can pick one or two to tell us, to share the story or share your experience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think one of the poems that we're going to talk about later is called Poetry. That's the name of it.
Yes.
And that poem is about really my relationship to Pablo Neruda.
Okay.
Now, I have not translated Pablo Neruda, but when I was trying to create my own style, really grow as a poet, really during undergraduate years, we're talking about the late 1960s. And at that time, Pablo Neruda was one of the great discoveries through translation by young English poets, English language poets, through the translations of the slightly older generation, people by now who are very old or even deceased, people like Mark Strand and James Wright and Robert Bly. So I began reading this work in translation, and it created a great connection for me to Latin American poetry in two ways. You know, I just loved it, and it was an addition to my own knowledge and love of poetry in English and French, which was already considerable. But this opened a sort of new world to me, and in a lot of ways, I felt a great kinship. I think each person who's destined to be a real poet feels when he looks at his own tradition or her own tradition that, oh yes, you belong to it in a lot of ways, but you also vary from it. You want to put things into it that are not there. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be a poet, you know, if you just wanted to copy it or something. So, you know, maybe you sort of obscurely feel what your difference is until you gradually move towards it. And I think the Latin American poets, starting with Neruda and continuing with my love of Neruda to this day, I read them all the time, helped me realize that compared to a lot of American and Canadian and English poetry, my whole vision is extremely passionate, sensuous, and sensual, very, very earth-rooted, and at the same time, very interested in the complete tension between the earth-rootedness and things that you would call spiritual or cerebral or intellectual. In the English tradition, you tend to find a poetry that wants to mediate and refine the earthly and the sensual and the spiritual through a highly worked out and preferred intellectual approach. So I learned through Neruda a more balanced approach. And this wasn't just a thing for the desk, because I began to translate not Neruda, but other poets that I met, but which were not as much translated. I mean, I encountered some of their work in translation. So this is how I began to learn Spanish on my own. Then I was so interested in this that when I began to have a little bit of latitude, when I had just graduated, my wife and I were married at the end of our senior year in university, and we worked for 1 year as journalists. We didn't have an opportunity to have a honeymoon, but the first thing we did when we could, a year later, was go to Mexico. And then over the next several years, we went to Mexico several times and spent considerable time there, mainly in the great city of Guadalajara. And there we sought out and found young poets of about our own age and even younger. And I translated them along with Teresa, who knew Spanish a lot better than I did and from whom I learned a lot of it. And these poets maintain a communication with me. I keep getting their books. One especially, Gilberto Mesa, is a good friend. I was just writing a letter to him and receiving a letter from him the other day. And he has become a pretty significant person. If you put back up the book covers, you can see right here at the bottom, do you see my pointer? You see Testament for Man.
Yeah, the last two, right?
Yeah, the third one from the left on the bottom. Well, that's a selected poems of Gilberto Mesa. And it was my and Teresa's first book of translation, published in about, I think, 1979 or 1980. Well, Mesa returned the favor, and in 1993, he published the book you see on the far right of the middle rung there, the one that's called Ciudad Interior, which means interior city. And that's a selected poems from all my books up until that time, translated into Spanish by Mesa, very, very beautifully. Mesa and some helpers
This one, right?
of his. Yes, exactly. And that was in, you know, both of these were really great experiences. But for instance, the one Mesa did for me, well, it allowed me to be a Spanish poet, which still kind of astonishes me. And I read my own work in Spanish, and I loved the translations, and it made a certain participation. It was published by a really good university press in a really good translation series, which had people like Marguerite Yourcenar and Jacques Prévert in it. So, you know, so I was among some real stars of foreign literature in this translation series by the Universidad de Zacatecas. And so that just shows not only some roots of my translation, but how it wove itself into my life. Now, let me just go on one little bit. Other books you see there, the bulk of my books of translation are books of translation from Ludwig Zeller. Ludwig Zeller, despite the German-sounding name, is a Chilean poet. He just died about a year ago. Great, great poet in the international surrealist tradition. And I knew of him and then got a chance to meet him in 1977 or 78. I was writing articles for the Old Books in Canada magazine, and they wanted one on poets in foreign languages living in Toronto. So there was one in Polish and one in German and so on. And I went and interviewed these people. And I moved very close to Zeller and his family. And I, with Teresa and family members, translated quite a few of his books. Now, his books have been translated by a lot of other people too, including people here in Toronto and in Canada. But I became his principal translator, basically. And so I translated him across the years. And his adopted daughter, Beatrice Housener, is a really wonderful contemporary Canadian poet, again in the surrealist tradition, which is extremely unusual in Canada. And her work is extremely unusual and extremely brilliant. And she remains one of my closest friends and associates. So you can see that for me, the translation was both intellectually and literarily a door open on a different world and a wider world and an international poetic world with living connections to the romantic European and Spanish tradition and living connections to the international surrealist tradition and its roots in France and other places, right? And I got to know people who had known Andre Breton, you know, and could tell you what it was like to meet Andre Breton himself and stuff like this through translation, right? But maybe that central thing is how much it contributed to my own work, because to translate something, you have to be really, really in deep dialogue with it. And it inevitably comes out in your own work. And so you should not translate something unless you want a kind of a marriage for life, unless you want to really live with that thing and make it part of yourself and give to it with your whole self.
Wow, you have a very high standard for translating. Okay, I wanted to now to ask you to read your translation works, so in both language. How about that?
Okay, this is great. Well, if everybody, you've got me on camera, right?
Yeah.
I'll hold up to the camera.
Okay, so I will stop sharing. So you will, okay.
So I'll see myself too?
I think so. Do
yes,
you see?
There I am. Okay, so there I am. You can see me there holding up my book, Night Street Repairs. That was, that book won the Relit Award for 2005 for Best Book of Poetry in Canada that year, right? And in that book, as in many of my books, I put as original poems some translations. And I put in there one by René Char, great French poet, one by Yves Bonnefoy, one of the very greatest poets, who was living at the time of this book, in fact, only died about a year or two ago. And I put in one by the great Spanish poet, not Spanish American or Spanish language, but Spanish from Spain poet, Jorge Guillen. So this little poem, it was very important to me. It's a very beautiful poem, and it's in my book with the title, you know, Clear Stream after Jorge Guillen. So you want to put it back up?
Okay.
And I can read it off the screen on it because that's easier for me
than and also for easy for other people to, Okay.
Okay. So there's Jorge Guillen, great poet, and for much of his life, because of the Spanish Civil War, exiled in the United States, where he was a university professor. So in Spanish, the title is Arroyo Claro, right? El arroyo se rinde a su destino. Lo más bello es muy poco. Transparencia. Por el arroyo claro va la hermosura eterna. No, no hay ninfas. La claridad es quien descubre la delicia. Clara el agua, a los ojos propone profundidad de fábula. Y unos peces de súbito relámpagos soñándose aparecen. Okay, the clear stream. So the English goes this way. The stream embraces its fate. The loveliest is very little. Transparency. Down the clear stream runs eternal beauty. No river nymphs. Here clarity is what unclothes its delights. The water's clearness offers the eyes the profound depths of fable. And quick fishes, lightning flashes, dream themselves and appear.
You know, I like this poem. It's very simple, but it has a profound meaning, right? It finds the beauty inside, in very small thing, right? And also it's very clear inside. It's purity there. Everyone can find it, right? It's like a refreshing of ourselves, right?
Yes, that's right. I think the simplicity in addressing a thing of the earth is outstanding. The simplicity in addressing the human reaction to beauty. What is beauty? It's our response somehow to something. And the simplicity in giving that response is tremendous. But at the same time, a third dimension is it's a historical cultural argument and of a very complex sort. And you don't even realize that. You kind of absorb its intellectual meaning almost automatically, because what it's saying is the modern way of looking at things is without mythological metaphors and fables and stories to impress us that there's depth and mystery in something. We try to see the mystery in the thing itself.
Yeah, it's nature essential there, right?
Yeah, so we don't have to see the naked nymphs to be fascinated by it. And we don't have to have a story of how this spring got its name from the god Apollo or anything like that to understand the depth and the beauty of it. And so, or Jorge Guillen, let's say, is putting his chips on that side of the argument. And so, so that's another dimension of it. And you could find others. Just let me say, why don't I just say too, that it's got a form which I tried my best to imitate. First of all, I could not imitate the rhyme, and so I did not. The rhyme in Spanish, you can see, is not pure rhyme as we would call it. They have pure rhyme, they use pure rhyme, but they also use this assonance rhyme, rhyme of the vowels only. So arroyo poco, right? O, O, O. And when they're using that, it's always a accented and an unaccented. So transparencia eterna, ninfas delicia, and so forth, right? So I couldn't do that. But what you do have here that I can do is el arroyo, 4 syllables. Transparencia, 4 syllables. No eyes, alides the way they count. No hay ninfas. Claro agua. Unos peces. So 4 syllables followed by the 11-syllable line, which is their version of iambic pentameter, our 10-syllable line. So what I did is do a 2-beat line, a strict 2-beat line, and then a 5-beat iambic pentameter line. The stream embraces transparency, no river nymphs, or the water's clearness, and quick fishes. And then its fate, the loveliest, is very little. Down the clear stream runs eternal beauty. Here clarity is what unclothes its delights, and so forth. So I was able to do a rhythm of that and form that was very close to Jorge Guillen's, and helps give the impression that despite the sensuality of the poem, there's also a very great intellectual and abstract structure to it.
Okay, good.
Right?
Thank you for explaining this. Thank you. It's very helpful. Now, I want to read another one, and this is another kind of dream. So,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I mentioned Ludwig Zeller.
Yeah.
And Zeller's work goes from very hard surrealism, so you'd read 3 lines of it and it would cross your eyes, and it filled with inexplicable images, all the way to material that is like classic German or English romanticism or classic Spanish lyricism. And here's one that kind of, from later in his career, that kind of blends those, because it's surrealist in that it's a dream, and it's like a modern poem in that it describes the dream, but it also describes waking up and thinking about the dream, and it's a love poem. So he says, preferring a dream. Waking and seeing her at the foot of the bed, ready to leave, her hair gathered in a knot, he hesitated for an instant, but then said, I love you more now than during the night, when fever and desire imprison you in petals. Offering him her mouth, she repeated, see you soon. And he pressed his eyelids to avoid watching her leave. He knew that in the dream a moment before, she, completely naked, had smiled at him in a street that doesn't exist. And maybe she would return in another dream to time eternal, where lilies moan under the passing steps of the wind.
Yeah, beautiful. I really like the when fever and desire imprison you in petals, then where lilies moan under the passing steps of the wind, right? It's kind of the image connect also,
That's right.
It's also it's broken,
Yeah.
So it's like a dream, right? It's a passing
That's
by,
right.
right?
And you get allusions to the dream. She smiles at him walking naked in a street that doesn't exist. And if you know surrealism, then perhaps you know those paintings by Paul Delvaux filled with dreamy naked women and cityscapes, right? And but you're right. There's idea rhyme between the end of the first stanza and the end of the second. They both have the image of flowers. They both have a positive mixed with a negative sense of the flowers, that you're imprisoned in them. Even though it has to do with desire, it's also fever. There's lilies in the wind, but they are moaning under his passing steps. So it's just, to me, Zeller is one of the greatest writers who ever put one word after another on the soil of Canada, and a very great poet. And the fusion in this poem of the positive and negative, the waking and the dream, the intellectual and the passionate, is tremendous. And you can't, this is a perfect poem to me because it is so meaningful, and yet you can't say in a usual rational way, it means this. What it means is the totality of human experience and feeling to which we're usually blind, and which poetry's job is to continually reawaken in us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. You made a very good selection for us. Anyway, okay. Now, because when I translating other poets' work, I also have had the mixed feelings and the mixed experiences. So I wrote this poem, short poem, to explain or describe the mixed feeling or my experience. So I will share with you and with others as well. So on translation, sometimes it's a maze I fall into. I call for light, for a guide, struggle to find my way. Finally, out of it, I'm not myself. Sometimes it's a lake, clear to see. I swim across it with ease. Looking back, I find my own mark left behind. Sometimes it's a dialogue, words longing for one another. Two languages stream like sounds, chiming from the deep. Sometimes it's a dream. I walk into yours and find you waiting. Then you lead me through each door with your own key. So, you know, sometimes when I translate other people's poems, I got lost. I'm confused, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes you see, sometimes you think you understand everything, right? You translate, then later on you find, oh, you still use your own kind of words or interpretation, right? And sometimes it's, like you said, it's a dialogue, right? Sometimes it's a dream. It's open a door to another world. To more world. Yeah,
I think that's a profound poem, and in English it's very beautiful. It leads me to many questions, but I just love the end of it. When we come to read my poem about Neruda called Poetry, you'll see very much the same idea. You lead me through each door with your own key. I think, you know, I said some very exalted things about translating, but it's from the point of view as if you were always successful. I think one of the main things is, if I want to continue to compare it to a marriage or relationship, you know, you don't, and you don't want to wholly understand the person from beginning to end, and you're finished with her right at the beginning. And anyway, you cannot do that with another human being. You're always going into the person more deeply, and if you're wise, listening and letting yourself be led into them by them. And it never is really finished, right? You never get to the end of it.
Yes, yes. So speak of this leading, the door open, right? Now I want to share your poem, the poetry. I translated it in 2014 because the Poetry Sky, the editor, asked me if I have some like a translation to submit to them. So I asked you, and I chose this poem to translate. So, and later on, I revised my translation. So today we will share these experiences. So first I want you to read it for us. Could you?
Yes, absolutely. And I hope you'll read the Chinese pretty soon. Now, how am I going to do this? I'm going to look at my paper copy right here. So bear with me. And I'll look over in this direction, okay? And I'll even put my glasses on to be extra careful, then I can really get it.
Okay, good.
So let me just say briefly, so that the readers can, our listeners can grasp what's going on dramatically. It starts out with, "You chose the right path in life." That's the author of the poem talking to himself. You know, we always say, look back and say, did I do the right thing with my life? So he's having one of those moments, and he's saying about poetry, yes, it was the right thing to choose above all other things. So that's the point. That's how it opens, right? Okay, poetry. You chose the right path in life, though as it assures you, it abashes you with crushing beauty. Like these lines of Neruda, you desire, the way at 11 you desire a girl. To write just one verse like that, to know the fruitful softness, the whispering of shadows in light-sprinkled entrances, the female strangeness of their male force. As Neruda's century passed and the astonishment his coming had aroused decayed, in you it grew. As the dead fall away, the living is laid bare, more living. You look up from his book and are in a world more world. And you look up from that new world and are in his book, more book. Another earth, another early home and childhood. He shelters as he overshadows. An older brother, still a child himself, you two are orphans, and guarding you through forests and the eyes of crowds, he reaches manhood, and yet he's still the youth of the good promise, alpha point of unhewn roads. You feel abundance and the void rise alert, tender, as they watch him pass and engulf him. A love so dark, you have to long to pierce it repeatedly.
Thank you for reading this. You know, everyone see I marked some lines in different colors, right? So I found your poem, L. You use contrasting words. So for example here, it assures you, right? And it abashes you. So it's contrast, right? And also shadows, light sprinkled, and also you feel abundance and the void, right?
Yes.
So I found that you use this technique can invite the reader to stop and think. So we stop and think why it's contrast, and also it adds some like intensity for the poem.
Yeah.
And also a mystery there. So, and you know, for Chinese, when I tried to translate it to Chinese, I found I found the challenge line is actually a word, more word. His book, more book. So if I translate word for word, nobody understands. A word, more word, what kind of word, more word. A book, more book, what a book. So I needed to understand the poem more deeply to know why you say that more word. So for me, I think the word is more humanity, more essential, and go back to the nature world. So then I try to use Chinese 2 words to describe the world, to translate it. So then people understand that world is what kind of world. And for his book, more book, I also need to think about. And for me, I think you when you return to from another world to return to his book, you feel you see more wisdom in his book and wiser in his book. So then I use another two Chinese words to describe this wide and seeger to describe the book. So then people understand, oh, you return, the book open another door for you, like another high level kind of intelligence for you. So that's why I use the two words. At the beginning, I don't know how to translate that. And also, also they had another challenge as the last two lines, as they watch him pass. So when I translate into Chinese, I needed to decide which gender to use. Is it female or male? I needed to decide. So for me, I think because this poem is a very sensual poem, and also it's that has a sexual meaning implying. So for example, at the beginning you said at 11 you desire a girl, and also female and male's force, mystery there, right?
Yes.
So, and also a love so dark you have to long to piece it. So I decided to use the female gender to translate that. And also for me, I feel it's for each poet, we all attract to poetry, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are attracted to poetry. Sometimes we have the deep passion or love for the poetry. So use this kind of physical or nature attraction from the physical world. It's okay. Use females, right? It's more attracting, more makes sense. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I decided to translate like that. Okay, I will read the Chinese version, and I also marked here the yellow. The yellow line is what I did for translation, and for this words because I use these words, I feel it's more humanity, more essential, and for these words I feel more wiser. So that's why I use it. And I also marked here this Chinese female gender here, and this is for contrast words. So yeah, I will read to you. Okay. 诗，你选择人生正确的路途，虽然它迷醉的美宽慰你，也困惑你，就像你渴望聂鲁达的诗句，如同11岁渴望一个女孩，谱写一首那样的诗。知悉那果实般的柔软，光线闪弱的路口处，阴影私语。那男性力量的女性神秘。聂鲁达的时代已去，它的来临唤起的惊愕朽化了，在你这里却生长。随着死的逝去，活着的被裸露，越发生动。同他的书，你仰望，你抵达一个更普世的世界。同这个新世界仰望，你抵达他的更神明的梳理，另一个地球，另一个早期的家园和童年，一个兄长，自己也不过一个孩子，他庇护你，也让你相形见绌。两个孤儿的你们，他引导着你穿过森林和人群的眼睛，抵达成年，但他仍然是美好承诺的少年，未着之路的起点。当他们温柔地看着他经过并吞没他，内心的充沛和空虚让你警惕，一种漆黑深切的爱，你不得不渴望反复地去穿梭它。So,
Beautiful.
thank you. Anyway, I also marked here the red line, right? The red line, because I find in your poem, you're lonely, you're searching for company, you're searching for guide, you're lonely. So I feel a lot of poets, we are orphans, we are lonely, right? So that's why I wrote a poem after the translate your poem. And the title is, so here I want to share it. Because during translating other people's poems, you also can learn and also can gain something, right? So this is the result of my translating your poem. This is the fruit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Late train. In our last call, we talked about weather. Spring is finally here, and I forgave the long winter. I intended not to mention those cold nights. I moon-watered your poems. They flowed into my veins, softening my snow-buried garden. No point to worry you. I remarked that the winter sweet bloomed. I could send you some shoes. We too are orphans. I remember a precious diary given to me for my 18th birthday, so delicate and exquisite. I wrote in it and saved it for you. My handwriting still hasn't become better. My best poems haven't arrived. The diary grew out of date and eventually was lost. Our call ended with Mary Oliver's line, "Poems are ropes to let down for the lost." Outside my window, night trains come and go. I catch shadows of wings that only soar in dreams.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you. So I feel like for poets, we sometimes, for me, especially for me, I use poetry sometimes as a healing, right? As like to warm up myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just comment that you add in with that comment and with that poem a very personal, emotional dimension to what I was saying earlier about the kinship I found in Latin American poetry when I first discovered it, despite how much I loved the poetry of my own tradition.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to another poem, speak of a new world. So this is every step was into a new world, right? So could you read it for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This poem is a very short one from my book called Sequence, a Poem. And it's a book-length kind of succession of almost all short poems. They just follow each other without titles, divided into 10 groups or chapters. And this one is one that's right near the conclusion, so you can tell it's sort of getting towards the point of the poem or something, right? Every step was into a new world, drenched in memory and longing. These were the dew there. The sun sparkled in it, the low sun that pierced the tips of the oak crowns on the eastern, the far side banks. A sparkling that never would leave us, that later we would know again in the splendor of a breast shining in lace, the stirring of birds by the creek, the fluttering in our struck heart. The sun shone through the drops of memory, and the child was wet, chilled, and warmed. The child we were. He and she heard in nerves and muscles and brought their eyes close to the places they could see in the drops, some of the new worlds of the spot where we'd halted for the morning.
Okay, I have marked here for different color. So I like Chin Lei Lei is a friend of Alice, and she participated in our last session. She asked to participate to translate your poems. So she chose this poem, and I found we have some difference. And like most part, our translations are similar. Most part, yeah. For this part, we have some difference. So I have shared both of our translations, and I hope to open for the discussion later. But because we have a lot to still have a lot to do, so we will quickly go, because today you will stay with us a little bit longer. Right?
Okay.
So I take the opportunity to move on. Then we will come back to discuss the difference, and we will see how to understand, or how, because everyone can have a different interpretation, right? So we will see. Yeah, we will discuss. So we will move. Oh, okay. Yeah, because for the child, I have a very special feeling for the child. So I wrote a poem for that, and I think it's a dialogue with your poems. So that's why I wanted to share this. Okay. A dream. Into a forest, you follow a sound. The child you are searches for seeds of passion fruit. Instead, leaves of autumn fall over you. Their rich colors make a maze of wonderland. Picking up one and another, you see a map of lost memories, each jobs of yesterday, each light of moon and sun, sweet and sad. Suddenly, you grow up. On the autumn mirror, the sparkling, moving new world that you have stepped in, your fingertips slip into, spinning, shining stars. The child you are, the child you are not, scoop up the sweetness, the sound of a heart calling to awake. The child you are, the child I am. So, I really feel sometimes it's a child in you, inside of you, awake yourself, right? Yeah, I have a long story for that, but later next time I will share the story. But yeah, so I hope it's a dialogue with your each step with the child, and also your journey as well.
It truly is a dialogue with me, Anna, and I'm greatly honored that you responded in such a way. You know, I'll just say that in my 1986 book, The Tradition, I have a poem which starts out, sometimes a man feels a boy step out of him and close the door. You know, so it's the same kind of idea you got there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes, for me, I think poetry let me find the child as well, and also the child let me find the poetry. So it's kind of both way. It's it's like a fate or something. Anyway, I like this poem very much as well. It's a very profound poem. So I hope you can read it for us.
Now, which one is this?
A narrow silence road.
Oh yes, okay. I've got it. Well, I'm going to just use your copy on the screen because this one is a little bit clearer.
Down, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have more confidence that I can see it all well enough. Okay, a narrow, silent throat. How many nights eaten by rain have I sat here dreaming of the world, this world which is, facing a blank wall, the sound of ruining water. Or dreaming by day when the dust filled the throat and the dry light burnt all strength from the eyes. A dream of night with its grateful moisture out of the sides of the air, its repose of trees and hedges, its gift of music in running water. Dreaming in suffocating nights of a noon on wooded slopes. Breathable flame, agate that quenches thirst, and the excellent shape of a maple leaf, its shadow among a million shadows conferring a just degree of darkness upon day, the vegetable humanizing the light. Dreaming of a life still possible in an anguished moment, a narrow silent throat where one by one, pulsing and shining, the unbodied elements pass.
Okay, very good. So you see, I still mark the yellow lines here. So a friend and also tried to translate your poem, and I found that we have different view or difficult challenge to translate the yellow part. And
Yes.
could you explain a little bit so we have not enough time to discuss, so we hope you can explain, yeah, a little bit.
You're talking about the yellow lines there. Okay,
Yeah,
like
yellow line.
I frequently try to embed in my images my basic concepts and say them very briefly in a way that I hope will come across almost subliminally. But what this shows is the person is facing a day which is too bright, and as he faces ones that are too wet or too dark or too cold, right? And he's always dreaming of a world that will be truly human, perfect, livable. Boy, is that more relevant now than it was back in, 1968 or 70 when I wrote this poem. But so what this kind of says is a leaf has excellence, and its shape, its shadow, and all the other brother leaves that it has, the million shadows of all the leaves, what they do is confer the right amount, a just degree of darkness on the day. So the night is suffocating, but at least it gives him the idea of darkness, and it makes him dream that in the day there will be shade that will defend us from too much light. And so the vegetable kingdom takes pure light and makes it human by mixing it, by creating a mixture of darkness and light that is shade. I think one of the basic concepts in my poetry is that shade, the mixture of darkness and light, is what is good on the human scale. So I tend to be against the famous traditional opposition. Dark is bad and light is truth and goodness and so on. I think too much of either of them is murderous, and they've got to be mixed. So that's what's behind those lines. Okay.
Another thing is a dream of a life still possible. Sometimes for the life, we can in Chinese we can describe a creature's life or a life, a way of life. So like daily life. So which way you think, or for us in Chinese, I think either way I can translate either way. So which way you?
Well, that's a good question. If that's the traditions in Chinese, it might be a little bit hard, and you might have to go to some kind of new way of saying to get that. But what a life there just means, maybe you could say it's a way of life. He just is looking at the world as being very unsatisfactory. He's dreaming about the world, and he's hoping that his dream could be this world, which is but transformed, because this world so often comes to us as a blank wall, something menacing or impossible to penetrate. And what is happening all around us is ruin, water, everything that flows past like water is constantly eroding and destroying and flooding everything. Or on the other hand, sometimes everything's to be drying out and turning into dust, which is the symbol of death and aridity and nothingness, right? And so he keeps dreaming of an earthly reality which would be good, which would promote rather than destroy life. So it's as if he says the life we have is not really life. It's almost like in the Neruda poem, the world, more world, the book, more book. They intensify each other. So his dream allows him to take this life with all its problems and worries and impossibilities and dissatisfactions and convert it into a possible life. And he says this life is still possible despite all that is negative about humans and nature. Nonetheless, I cling to my dream of of a renovated world, a transformed world that would be all that we imagine that life in nature could be and life in society could be when we imagine what goodness is. So that's what a life still possible means there. It means life transformed. So in the tradition of the Western religions, you get the ideas of salvation or glorification. And they're always the idea that you'll be what you were here, but somehow once you're risen, you'll be transformed into the perfect image or the perfect form of it. It's something like that, right?
Okay, yeah, I will ask Yuan Haiwang, are you here? Yuan Haiwang, if you're here, you can send the chat in the chat room. Okay. If you're here, send in the chat room to or unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Yuan Haiwang. Yuan Haiwang, are you here? Okay, suppose he is here, but maybe he missed. Anyway, so we will. I wouldn't read the Chinese version, and so we will go back to the poem, and for the discussion for the two versions, and two versions. So and I will describe a little bit the two versions and the difference. And Chen Lei, you can unmute yourself if you want, and also the video, you can start your video so we can discuss. Yeah, okay. So the two versions has difference is when I translate the child, I translate the younger child. The younger child is like, for me, I feel younger child is more innocent. It's pure or like it's so I'm translated because I feel it's because in your poem you mentioned the breast, you mentioned the lost early memories, early memories. So in Chen Lei, she translated more older child. So can you Lei, could you speak for your idea or your view? So yeah.
The child part, okay.
I mean, other part almost we are the same, right? And we all, most the difference is the end also the child part, yeah.
Okay, sure. So I read this part of the poem. So correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Morris. So I read this part as a celebration of tradition and heritage. The child was wet, and it's also a kind of, for me, it's a biological kind of human biology image. It could be the she child, or it could be the he child, and it also suggestive of the sexual kind of activity in to me. So the child was wet. So I just translated as 少年湿了. So very literal translation, basically. So chilled and warm. Again, the repetition of the sexual kind of human biological image. Chilled and warm, and it's possibly, it also speaks to me as the first kind of a boy's first experience of having a sweet dream of a beloved girl. So the biological reaction of that thing. Yeah, so we were that child, because that specificity of the image is also universal. So it's the child we were. We are all experienced that. So, and then following that, he and she purred in the in nerves and muscles. It's also like man, woman in love, and it's also sexual kind of connotated here. They brought their eyes close to the places they could see in the drops. So the drops here repeats repeats the word before, and you know, the drops of sunshine, sparkling sunshine. But here it can be drops of, you know, other good things, the condensed good part of the new world. So that's my reading. And in the bits of these drops, they see what we see as the most valuable part of the new world. So basically, that's my interpretation of the original poem. I could be wrong, but my translation is based on my understanding of the poem. So I kind of make that sexual image visible in my translation. So I said, he, she, 他和她在身心愉悦中快乐低吟. So muscles and nerves and muscles can be hard because it doesn't sound poetic in Mandarin. It's the autonomy of human body parts, you know, it's kind of unpoetic. So for me, I find it, if I translate directly, it sounds unpleasant. But 身心 is a Mandarin idiom, which is also poetic. So I choose to use 身心. So 身心愉悦中快乐低吟, that's the purr, you know, means mourn happily. And so, and then the last two lines here, I think he and she here are actually see happiness. The happiness is the kind of imagery created in that poem. And then we, as said in the poem, we is actually those people who have already been here. They have experienced this kind of thing. But now he and she, as the young generation, is recognizing this place where we have stayed for a moment, and they also can see the beauty of the place. So that's why I understand the poem. Part of the poem is about tradition and heritage. Yeah, okay, so that's basically my contribution.
Okay, thank you, Chen Lele. So for me, I translated more is more like talking about the younger children have the pureness, have the curious about the world, about the new world, and also it's also the memory of motherhood, the early motherhood, like because like the milk. For me, I think about the wet and the warm. For me, I think my reading is more like the motherhood, the how to say, the warmness, and also the continual growth, growing, developing. And also when I translated the muscle and this thing, I used the Chinese word happily with do run run. So happily with do run means very excited. It's like a child innocent, just be happy about everything, be happy, be open to everything. So that's what I understanding. So yeah. So now we will hear your original.
Well, you know, I'm first of all, I think both of those are great interpretations, and I'm not going to argue with either of them.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, one reason why they may be different, it occurs to me just listening to you here, they're different on the point of whether it's a young child or an older child, is that I'm writing from an older point of view, and therefore I'm sort of like an older child. I was thinking specifically of young prepubescent children, right? And so I was thinking of the fact that, as far as I remember, though, there was a great childhood sexuality. When I'd go out with my little friends and so on, there was no doubt at all that we were interested in each other's sex, although we didn't have the same kind of feeling that later on when puberty struck you did, right? But nonetheless, it was quite real and quite conscious. And so when it says a sparkling that would never leave us, that later we'd know again in the splendor of a breast shining in lace, that is a way of saying there's a continuity with the child's amazement, self-centered amazement at everything that he or she meets. It's all new. And the new world that comes after puberty, which is so much taken as destroying the child's world and so on. But no, it's a new form of the same astonishment and power with which the freshness of the world hits us. So that's what I was thinking of there, really. And but on the other hand, when I say every step was into a new world, what is happening there is the current self, or you could say the self that is the older child, the child who is in puberty, is recovering and realizing his oneness with his early childhood self. So the recovery of memory, he specifically says later on we'd reacquire it in a different form, but he's trying to get back to remembering exactly what it was, right? So then something like he and she purred in nerves and muscles and brought their eyes close to the places. It's kind of my, one of my own memories of childhood, and which contributes to my definition of what it's like to be a child. First of all, the child is small and very close to the ground. So a dandelion or an ant or something is very big to a child. Later on, when you grow up, you're far away from them and you don't pay them much attention, which goes with the fact that you're busy and you've got a, you know, a much duller view of the world, and so you don't pay them much attention, right? But the child is close to them, is very interested in all the doings. And so a child is very aware of dewdrops. And I can remember this very distinctly. You see the dewdrops on the grass, you see the dewdrops in the flowers. Yeah. You know, you're standing next to a daisy and it's as tall as you are, and its wet, dewy head is right in your face. The other thing is you'd love to go outside and you'd run out into the dawn hours before anybody else in the house was awake, and it would be all wet in the grass because of the morning dew. And you'd sit there and you're a little chilly, but you're also very comfortable. And as soon as the early sun gets up at 6 a.m. and it just comes above the level of the trees and it strikes you, how wonderful that is to be warmed by the first bit of the sun while you're still chilly from the dew and the remains of the night. And to me, that causes your body to purr. You feel a vibration and a sound coming from, usually from the back of your neck as the sun hits you, and it sounds just like, and it feels like a cat's purring, which was aided by the fact that usually as soon as I came out and sat on the back steps and enjoyed the dawn, my cat would come and sit right beside me and I'd hear her purring, you know. So images like that are what go into the poem, and which I then try to make something else out of course, something that includes early childhood experiences with later ones and intellectual ideas and so forth.
Okay, good. Now, like Yuan Haiwang, could you unmute yourself?
We because saw,
okay.
Yeah, you can also start your video. So I asked him to read the poem translation. Because he's good better than me.
Not necessarily. Okay, so this
one,
right?
This is a narrow silent throat.
It's a Chinese. In Chinese.
Okay, all right. 多少个被雨侵蚀的夜晚，我坐在这里，梦想着这个世界，这个面对着一堵空白的墙和祸水的声音的世界，或在白天，当尘埃丰满喉咙，干巴巴的光线 焚烧眼里所有力量时，梦想着空气留意湿润的感恩的夜晚，树木和树篱的安息，以及流水奏响的音乐礼物。在窒息的夜晚里，我梦想树木繁茂山坡上的一个中午，透气的雁体，止渴的玛瑙和一片枫叶的优良造型。它的影子在百万个影子里，授予白天一个刚刚好的暗影。自然植物赋予光亮、人性。在极度痛苦的时候，我梦想一种生活仍然可能。底下看不见。
哦。
有人一发言的话，往上提一提，哎，往上走一走。
Okay, let me.
没关系。有人一发
okay now?
好 ，yes。有人一 send 这个 chat 的话，把它就挡住了。
because
对不起。
Okay, sorry.
没关系。好，我重来啊，我重来底下这一段。在极度痛苦的时候，我梦想一种生活仍然可能。一道底下又有人发东西，又挡住了，对不起。
It's okay, just one line, yeah.
挡住了。我看我有没有我的啊？对不起，实在对不起啊。
It's okay, don't worry. I just wanted to hear the difference. Difference with female and male. Okay.
我把我的 bring up 啊，好。在极度痛苦的时候，我梦想一种生活仍然可能。一道沉默狭窄的喉咙那儿，无形的元素一个接一个脉动着和闪耀着通过。好，谢谢。
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yuan Haiwang. And now, now almost our like this discussion with Al has done. So we will open for the questions, and everyone can welcome to unmute yourself and your videos. You can start your video. So it's chat time. It's a question and answer time. So if you want to see, and before that, I want to also remind you, like our next session is for Alice Major, is Friday. September 11th, Friday night. Yeah, our usual night. Yeah. So, okay, you can open your, you can start the video, or you can unmute yourself if you have a question and to ask.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Elle and Anna, for those beautiful poems. It's really enjoyment. Elle, I love your idea about this shade. We have very similar ideas in Chinese philosophy, as like Confucianism. You will be better off to be in the middle, like in a balanced life, not too strong, not too weak, not too bright, not too dark. That leads to harmony. So it's very similar. I have a question for you, Elle. So
okay.
you understand, you translate Spanish, so you understand Spanish language very well. And when you see your poems in Spanish, how did you feel? Like, what is your feeling about that? Do you feel it's so?
Also, when you see in Chinese, I translated 5 of yours.
But Elle doesn't understand Chinese. He can understand Spanish.
Okay.
So when he sees his English poems in Spanish, so how do you feel?
Well, first of all, I just feel wonderful because I do understand Spanish. Here I am as a Spanish poet, which is something that I couldn't even imagine. And the poems seem good to me in Spanish. Then I get interested in the details of them. Well, have known some of the translators, and they've